Hello, everyone, and welcome to Larry Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Doyle, and thank you for being here with me for this session. Now, let's get right into it. Tonight, I want to take you back to a moment in 1981, a moment most Americans have never heard of, a moment that should have changed everything, but changed nothing. It begins with a memo written by Shannon Fairbanks in the Reagan White House. A simple document, a few pages, but inside those pages was a truth that should have been delivered straight to a federal judge and wasn't. And that one act, that one failure is still shaping the way our government behaves today. The Fairbanks memo documented something extraordinary. In 1981, years after the Vietnam War ended, she wrote a memo that described a defoliation mission which was attempted at Benoit Air Base. Herbicides were loaded onto aircraft, the aircraft took off, and it discovered it had engine trouble, and the mission was aborted only because the aircraft malfunctioned. The aircraft made a left turn and returned to Benoit Air Base and sprayed 500 gallons of Agent Orange on base personnel. She wrote that there were 87 other aborted missions and that 41 of them involved Agent Orange. That wasn't a rumor. That wasn't speculation. That wasn't a veteran's memory decades later. This was the White House acknowledging in writing a real exposure event involving U.S. personnel. And here's the part that matters. At that exact moment, the Agent Orange class action MDL 381 was still under the jurisdiction of Judge Jack Weinstein in the Eastern District of New York. The government had a legal duty to notify the court of any newly discovered exposure populations. They didn't. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what the rule of law actually means. The rule of law is not complicated. It means the government follows the same rules it imposes on everyone else. Courts get the information they need to make fair decisions, and no one, not even the government, gets to hide the ball. When the Fairbanks memo was written, the government had a preservation order, a duty to disclose, a duty to notify the court, and a duty to protect the class. They did none of these. Instead, they made a choice, a deliberate choice, to stay silent. And that silence taught the system a lesson it has never unlearned. If we don't tell the court, nothing happens. That is the moment the rule of law cracked. Not shattered, not collapsed, just cracked, quietly, silently, and permanently. And you can see the consequences of that silence everywhere in the government today. When agencies miss deadlines, contradict themselves, refuse to search, pretend records don't exist, or send you letters that make no sense. They're not inventing new behavior. They're repeating a pattern that began the day the Fairbanks memo was written and never reported to the court. The culture shifted. The message became, we can ignore the court and nothing will happen. And once a system learns that lesson, it doesn't forget it. You're seeing it today in FOIA offices across the government, including the ones sending you contradictory letters, late acknowledgments, and remands because they never conducted searches. It all traces back to that moment in 1981 when silence replaced accountability. Now, let's step back even further. The founding fathers weren't naive. They understood human nature, they understood power, and they understood something we forget today. Free will cuts both ways. It gives you the ability to act with integrity, and it gives you the ability to look the other way. That's why they built checks and balances, separation of powers, judicial oversight, transparency mechanisms, and the expectation that government must answer to the people. They knew, absolutely knew, that someday a group of officials would face a choice to tell the truth to the court or stay silent. And they knew that if the wrong choice was made, the consequences would echo for generations. That's exactly what happened with the Benoit incident. A small group of people exercising their free will chose silence over duty, and the system has been living with that choice ever since. It's easy to blame the government as if it's a machine, But the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. People made that decision. Real people with names, with job titles, with responsibilities. And they chose convenience over duty, silence over disclosure, institutional loyalty over legal obligation. The founders tried to build a system strong enough to withstand human weakness, but they also knew something else. No system can survive if the people inside stop choosing integrity. The Benoit incident wasn't a failure of law, it was a failure of will. So why talk about a memo from 1981? Because the consequences didn't stay in 1981. They're alive today in FOIA offices that don't follow the law, agencies that contradict themselves, missing records, delayed searches, and a culture that treats transparency as optional. The Fairbanks memo is not just a historical artifact. It's the first domino in a chain that leads us directly to the problems we're facing right now. When the government learned it could ignore a federal judge and face no consequences, the rule of law didn't collapse, it eroded, one unreported event at a time. So when we talk about the Fairbanks memo, we're not talking about a piece of paper. We're talking about the moment the government abandoned its duty, the moment silence replaced accountability, the moment the rule of law was treated as optional, and the moment the founders warned us about. And until that moment is acknowledged, until the truth is put back into the record, the system will keep repeating the same mistakes because the rule of law only works when the people in power choose to follow it. And in 1981, they didn't. Tonight, we're putting the truth back into the light by talking to you because I can tell you, you can tell some others, and they can tell others still. And that is how we change what has happened and make the truth and the record be brought into the light. One voice at a time that will become many voices saying we know what happened and we know veterans were given the short end of the stick because of what happened. And we will not stand for it. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope it resonated with you and made you determined to hold institutions and agencies accountable for their actions. Abraham Lincoln said to care for him who has borne the battle. The VA adopted this as their motto. Now let's hold them accountable for Abraham Lincoln's belief that morality is as important as winning the battle.